Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two terrific poets with us today, Lois P. Jones and William O'Daly. Lois will read first and then William. Lois P. Jones was a finalist for the 2022 Best Spiritual Literature Award in Poetry from Horizon Books. In 2022, her poem La Scappa Gliata won the Lynx Bristol Poetry Film Competition. Other honors include the Bristol Poetry Prize, the Lascaux Poetry Prize, the Tiferet Poetry Prize, and winning finalist for the Terrain Poetry Contest. Jones has work published in the Academy of American Poets, Poem a Day, Poetry Wales, Plume, Guernica Edition, Verse Daily, the Bridgeport Poetry Prize Anthology, and Narrative. Her first collection, Night Ladder, Glass Lyre Press, was published in 2017 and was a finalist for the Julie Suk Award. She is the poetry editor of Kyoto Journal and screening judge for Claremont University's Kingsley Tufts Awards. Here's a marvelous poet, Lois P. Jones.
Thank you so much, Harry. I'm just delighted to be here. Thank you to Jennifer and Bill. It's great to share this space with you. So fun. Harry, I have to say that I listened to your recording of the Rilke Duino elegies and really, really enjoyed them. So it's great to hear it out loud and great to hear a native German speaker also sharing some of that. So wonderful program. So I'm going to probably have my program slightly short. I'm fighting heavy cold here and I don't want to start coughing. So I'm going to keep it just in check a bit. I will start with, so I've been working on a poetry project, as some of the people watching know, that has to do with Rilke's housekeeper, Frida Baumgartner, who lived with Rilke at Museau from 1921 to 1926, just before he died. And I've been writing persona poems from her point of view and also from my own experience visiting Museau and going to Raron and having a pilgrimage to his grave. And so interestingly, on a recent class assignment, someone said to another poet who posted a poem, your poem is like a Hammershoy painting. And I thought, wow, like a Hammershoy painting, that sounds lovely. What is it, And so I started this journey of researching Hammershoy. I fell in love with his paintings and I was so inspired by them. And I didn't know that, and also want to mention that his portraits of women, often they're from behind, sometimes from the front. And there was a particular one of his sister sewing, which made me think of Frida sewing, because I have a portrait of her as well. I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but let me minimize my screen a little bit here so I can see what's being seen. Yeah. So here is his housekeeper. And here is his sister, Hammershoy's sister. And I was thinking about what it's like to kind of be inside a Hammershoy painting, to live inside a Hammershoy painting. And so I started writing this series of poems. But I'll add as a last note that this current project is kind of like a deja vu because it keeps bringing me back to Rilke. So I discovered that, in fact, Rilke was a great admirer of Hammershoy and worked so much that he actually visited him in his home in Copenhagen. So that just really started things off. So this is called Life in a Hammershøi Painting, a study of parts. And it begins with an epigraph by his biographer, Emil Hanover. Hammershøi has finally breathed his soul and its melancholy into boldly painted landscapes beneath large gray skies. Their stillness, like the stillness of his art, is a silent protest against all the gaudy and gaping tastelessness of our time. 1. And this is after a photograph of Frida sewing. And it starts with her epigraph. My lace-making bobbins rhythmically dashed against their pillow. Mr. Rilke loved and admired my handiwork. I still clearly remember him saying, when I will no longer be able to write poems, I will start to make lace, but my hands are not as skilled as yours. Frida Baumgartner. The beads on the bobbins are beautiful, spangling braids in the noonday sun. I hold their tails, mesmerized by the round brown beads, the square cuts of glass which circle the enameled Venetian center. The quiet clink of bead against the long neck of bone carries the rhythm of pattern. I need no map, no parchment to map my design. My hands are invocation. I weave and wonder how many ghosts can fit inside me. If I lace anything out of loneliness, it is a curtain revealing a lover's face in the crowd. 2. The next one is from the viewpoint of Frida viewing Young Girl Sewing, Hammershøi's Young Girl Sewing. And she's had some education on exposure to art and literature. She read Tolstoy. She read a lot of Rilke's works and other writers. So Frida is viewing this young girl sewing. The world wants to silence my hands. Women of my era already catching their ankles in the rain, their shoulders bare at the window where their necks burn with erasure. Women of mason jars rancid with fruit who have sown too many fields. Women drunk from all-night parties and the memory of a man's scent on their satin gowns. But who praises this figure bent over the needle and brushed into grainy silence, whose arm embraces the waist below the dark brown bodice, the dim skirt half shadowed in afternoon light? If art reorders the world, look at the way her brow determines the shape of it. The eyes holding the loose filament of cloth, still translucent in her hands. 3. Here is a poem like a Hammershøi painting. I read it again and hold its slender weight in my palm, the spare text, exhumed on a single line. I can smear its cinder on my heart, set it next to the sliver of slate taken near Rilke's headstone. To write with such stasis requires a mind of the grave, not of death, but of the moments which have already passed. How a body turns away toward the door, a woman's black dress unlatching its darkness. See how light breeze down the nape of the neck, ownerless, as if the wind cast you into it. 4. Rilke visits Hammershøi in Copenhagen. And here's his quote. These women can only turn their backs on him, and yet he holds their sadness, speaking it with his blacks and grays and blues. He gives himself to their silence. He is these women, whose breathing and whose meditation makes the room burn. 5. Interior, 1899. Sometimes a woman lands inside a scene and she can only turn her back to it. Faceless, she can be anyone. The wife whose mother grew mad as an abandoned garden. Her neck as soul, the way light is born of its phosphine. You know it's her, not because of the body, but the way spirit tilts the head on its axis. Something fills the space around the mind in intangible winter. Thoughts that walk on stilts. A thread holds up the body. Something presses from behind, pushing the length of her into the next room. Sometimes the walls are chalk white and the skirts speak their Grieche and Dutch blues. You try your future on like a pair of black stockings. You try it on. You tear it off. This next poem is also an ekphrastic poem, and this was written about Van Gogh's self-portrait when he cut his ear off. Nobody quite knows what the situation was with his ear, where exactly it happened, what did he do with it, but there was a whole book dedicated to it fairly recently. So I was inspired to write this poem. It's called Self-Portrait with Bandaged Ear and Pipe, 1889. And it has an epigraph. Keep this object carefully, Van Gogh. Not to shock the prostitute, whose flower you'd recently splashed, poppy red, already crusting on its ground. Not because many years worm bore its way into your mind, or how the paint you drank from the brush jar drew you down its dim well. Not that you sliced your left ear with a razor when Theo told you he was to marry Jo Van. Not even a recent theory that in a fit of anger, Gauguin flicked off the lobe with his rapier and blood splattered carmine, stifling your shoes, already confused with too much pigment. It's still a mystery sticky as tallow. Believe what you wish. Perhaps, as Levis suggested, the woman placed the ear on a windowsill to listen for her, whether to comfort or terrify, he didn't say. But yesterday, as I walked the moss-ridden path, I saw a single calla lily listening from the forest floor, sheltered by the pines and surrounded in jade, looking white as an apology. So this poem is from the viewpoint of Rilke's wine. And this is in the year of his death, 1926. So it's called Rilke's Wine, Museau, 1926. And it has an epigraph from Rilke. It wasn't in me, it came and went. I wanted to hold it, but the wine held it. I am more than what land brings. Taste of lichen, dung, storms thrashing the poplars. My past is somewhere in the Celtic tombs. I still linger inside a blue clay jug, dark cherries simmering in the earth. In this chrysalis, I'm a stolen kiss, blood of the woman who planted me and pricked her palm. Then I became his. When I thirsted, he knelt by the brook that ran from the glacier bucket after bucket, the icy water changing his fingers to kindling. Did he want to be changed by me when he lay down between my rows, when the sky was so black, all you knew was the high-pitched chitter of the stars? Didn't I burn green, then gold for him, glinting after rain like a nib of his quill? I let the sun have its way with me until I was ready to be plucked. No one was allowed to press me by hand, just the weight of myself, freeing my fragrance. Then he poured me into oak and lit the cellar candles. I know his poem was a prayer to bless the barrel, a desire to ripen, all of me dissolved into a potion of silk, dark as dirt beneath his fingers. You want to know how I moved through him until his face flushed with fever? I felt his falling deep in his lungs. I saw his body's need to blister. What could I have been made of to heal him? That September, he stood in the vineyard and breathed the last of my skin. I felt the first chill, how the bees hovered and hummed. I think I'm going to break to a night ladder poem. I have a couple more to read. And this one was from a wine documentary I worked on in Argentina and fell in love a million times. And this is called Under a Mendoza Trellis. Everything flows through me, but nothing is lost. Not a drop of wine or a breath of rosemary. Across the pine table, you pour yourself like sunstorm on a thirsty riverbed. Speak as if you know the meaning of my name. You ask me to bear this, to remember the scent of apples and the green heart of the poplar growing in endless rows. A woman is strumming guitar. You are shirtless, wearing your curls like a fever. The intricate pattern of shadow under trellis, how you laugh easily and deep, look straight into my blood, and I'm as full as the grapes in the canopy. Here is the impulse, strong as the pull of strings. I try to lose you in the gaucho's ballad, let the guitar soften time in our bones. But you spill another river of wine in my glass, shake your head, and smile at my refusal. Your voice, smoke of the asado. Today is a glass half drunk, a moment of knowing how you pour, how you pour. So Frida spent a lot of time by herself and had a lot of occasion to ponder her state. And this is called Housekeeping, Muso at the Great Keep. I keep this house, this keep, it keeps me to it, not a kept woman, not swept up, but sweeping my way through its small rooms, as if I could clear the web corners that trap my hours. I keep to it, keeping up with the moon's smallness, its glow through the floorboards, a house held up by hand. I keep his silence, keep my arms around my shoulders when the nights are thistle in the blood. This evening, the wind kept its voice low and opened the door. It swept my wrists with coxcomb. It was enough. And my last poem is a nod to my friend Bill, and to Neruda. And recently we discovered that Neruda was indeed poisoned. And I wrote this poem 10 years ago when they were exhuming Neruda, and I knew that they were going to, dissect his parts and split the body up and send parts of him all over the world. So this is called Exhumation on the occasion of Pablo Neruda's exhumation, April 2013. After 40 years in the dark, your bones re-enter the living in a morning light. Oh, I should add, I'm sorry, that there are a few lines here from Neruda. Slowly opens like a languid fruit, shuddering walls in your struggle between matter and light. And then you'll hear one other familiar one. After 40 years in the dark, your bones re-enter the living in a morning light that slowly opens like a languid fruit. The surf still sings your praises at Isla Negra, crashing amidst the chaos. What does it care for those who surround your tomb with their wheelbarrows and rumors of poison? You have already moved past the shuddering walls in your struggle between matter and light. The loam lifts from your grave as they carry your coffin of air. They will send your body to foreign lands and attempt to decipher your fire. I grieve, but not for you. I grieve for Chile, for all of us who spent the nights in your arms with our moon full of candles. We will write the saddest lines. Write, for example, that truth is a star over a foggy breakwater, and death a black island with no boat to carry you home.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
penetrating, precise, and sharp vision, and the tenderness you have and the love for your fellow poet and artist is just astounding.
Oh, thank
Very
you.
poignant, very moving. I love that last poem. Very touching. I grieve for Chile. You have a large vision. So thank you very much, Lois. We have a little bit of time before William comes on. A couple of questions. When did you write your first poem?
Oh, well, I wrote as a teen, kind of, indiscriminately, as most teens do, crushes and things like that. I didn't seriously start writing poetry. I discovered it, oddly enough, in Geneva, in Switzerland, not far from where Rilke lived. And I was inspired by Paul Éluard, the French surrealist. And I read a lot of his work. And then suddenly, in 2003, I wrote my first poem, and just kept going.
Where did you grow up? You mentioned Switzerland, among other countries. Where did you grow up?
So I actually grew up in Chicago. And then I came out here in the Greyhound bus when I was 19 with $50 in my pocket and decided I was going to have an adventure. And I've never returned from that adventure. Of course, I discovered a lot of things, including poetry here. I lived in Switzerland on and off for 3 years when I had a relationship, and just loved being in Europe, loved waking up to the bells every morning. I think my heart is there ultimately, but here I am.
And what is it about the poetry form that attracts you to it?
I think it enables us to carve, sculpt experiences that have touched us in ways that no other medium can. It translates the ineffable, it attempts to, and I'm always fascinated by the in-between worlds, the metaphysical worlds. So that's a lot of what I try to permeate in my writing. And I think that that's, for me, my resounding kind of passion for poetry, which is that desire to straddle both worlds and write about it.
And who are a couple of the poets who you were influences to you before you were born? You know, poets in the back in the tradition that may have influenced you.
Yeah. So definitely Lorca. And in my book Night Ladder, there's several poems, homages to him. Neruda was definitely an influence. I couldn't get enough of Neruda when I first started writing, and of course Rilke, who was kind of the main man and has continued to stay with me all this time. So those were some of the greats.
You got great taste.
Thank you.
But thank you very much, Lois. It's a pleasure to meet you for the first time, and William too. And it just, you're a marvelous poet, as I said earlier. So thank you for uplifting us all and touching us, you know, to remind us, you know, what excellent poetry is. So thank you very much.
Thank you for this beautiful program.
Thank you. Our next poet is William O'Daly. William O'Daly has translated 8 books of the late career and posthumous poetry of Chilean Nobel laureate Pablo Neruda, and most recently, Neruda's first volume, Book of Twilight, a finalist for the 2018 Northern California Book Award in Translation. The author of 4 chapbooks of poems, he published his first full-length volume of poems, The New Gods, with Beltway Editions in September 2022. Among other commendations and awards, he received the American Literary Award from the bilingual Korean-American journal Maiju Poetry and Poetics in September 2021. Currently, he is lead writer for the California Water Plan, the state's strategic plan for sustainably and equitably managing water resources. Here's a wonderful poet, William O'Daly.
Thank you so much, Harry. I appreciate that. And I'm a big fan of all your work, if I can add that. So it's an honor to be here, and it's always a pleasure to read with Lois, just to hang out with Lois and listen. And thank you, Jennifer, as well, and all who support this marvelous program. I'll be reading exclusively from The New Gods today. It's odd. I waited a long time to publish this book, and Beltway Editions did a gorgeous job, design and all. I'm very grateful. I'm going to read a few sections from the first poem in the book called The Fire. This poem originates from my years as a teenager backpacking in the Southern Sierra. I was raised in LA, and I gravitated toward the Sierra strongly. I was an asthmatic kid, so I wanted to beat that. So I became quite the backpacker. New Army Pass, Old Army Pass. And doing that, being out there, really helped me form a lot of my worldview. People say you go out there to escape. I found quite the opposite. Hanging out at 12,000 feet, looking down and going, oh my God, what a mess down there. At times, at any rate. The epigraph to this poem is Solvitur ambulando, Latin for it is solved by walking. The rising sun spins a web of ferns, red columbine, icy stream tumbling from the cloud-hidden peak through the sweltering canyon to fill the ocean. Moss hangs from the madrone like tails of the grazing horses that'll rear up, step into a gallop when the flutter of sparrows ignites. 7 days hiking switchback passes, bathing in glacial lakes, weary in muscles and thought, we step from granite boulder to granite boulder and into a wildflower meadow. The body of summer rises from the grass of Parnassus to touch with the intimacy of wings the tangled limbs of the sky. Water splashes over shallow stones, metal cups jangle against the packs, and in our descent we climb where the trail forks, washes out. Scrabbling over scree and fallen pine, we discover each other in the stream. Dipping our cups, we, exhalations of God, live our full moment, and later is pigment, red clay in the mountain. Days ago, our names began to read like trails that never arrive, smelling of yarrow and smoke. Our prayer is sweat souring creases, elbows and clothes, these trembling limbs and questions that abide in silence. The trail evaporates in gravelly sand. The gulls squabble over a last scrap of rotten clam. We pass under the highway among stranded pools, slip the packs from our backs, untie our boots. When the dying wave soothes our aching feet, excesses of light recede. In your hand, the knife joins dried fish and bread and wild onion. We are born, a seed splits. Our blood salts its praise for what we make possible tonight. This next poem is an ekphrastic poem. It was written to a painting by Christian Sahota called Christian's Animal One, and it was first performed at the Sacramento Fine Arts Center to the Dave Brubeck Jazz Quintet accompaniment. I love doing paintings, jazz, and poetry. It's one of my favorite things. This poem also had its roots, you won't probably see it or hear it in the surface, but bullying and how, say, a 14-year-old, for instance, articulates trying to put their life together and prepare for their future. Christian's Animal. The epigraph is, every little thing wants to be loved. Sue Monk Kid. When you stare at me, do you see yourself, eyes of porphyry? Perhaps I could be your animal spirit and roam the playa and the stars. Built to last, ready to move on, I climb the misty pinnacles of Guanji, older than my age among the Araucaria of the lower Andes. I am patient as 10,000 years, waiting to see the canyons of Coconino County, where surely my memory will grow deeper. I will be river or mountain, a galaxy that moves according to gravity, to necessity, to natural numbers and scent. Most days I do my chores, but now I want to go outside and wave to the 7 dancing children moving across the night. I pray that one day they will return and be what we no longer take for granted. A mourning dove enters a mine shaft, and I join hands with the lost, afraid of becoming what I am not. I kiss the darkness that knows I am not ready. The more I love, the stronger I become. In writing this book, over a number of years, one of the biggest surprises to me was its preoccupation with children in many different ways. That's not something I set out to do, but as probably many of you know, we write poetry to find out what it is we're thinking and feeling. And I have to mention, I was teaching a number of years ago, teaching in the Artisan Schools program in Montana. And after teaching at a junior high in Missoula, several weeks after, my cabin burned down. Actually, a friend, being careless with a cigarette, burned it down. And so I was taken in by someone else in the program, a good friend who was living in Missoula. And early one evening, I was at the window in the kitchen washing dishes, and I hear these voices. Poet, poet, come out of the house. And there were 3 kids who I had taught at the junior high out on the street, waving for me to come out. They just gotten out of school and were riding their bikes. And this is a conversation we had, and I thought, boy, we really aren't conversing with each other. We're kind of going in different directions. And afterwards, I realized what we were doing was writing a poem, essentially. And so I encapsulated their part of the conversation in a young soldier. Come out of the house. The epigraph, they will say you are on the wrong road if it is your own. Antonio Portia. Before the house burns down, open your eyes to the rain and the owl. In the plaza, a soldier is smoking. The elm puts on new leaves. My daddy doesn't want me to be any artist, not even a rancher like him. His sweat goes to deadbeats, like the cattle in the songs. I still have that part of me fire transformed. Is it wrong for a man to cry at 3 in the afternoon? Poet, don't you know fire makes you young, gives you something real to fear? In my pocket, I carry the jawbone of an ass. I learn virtue, planting myself among the delphiniums. Poet, feel the flame, excuse me. Poet, feel the flames at your feet. Feel this ground like water in the earth. Spring is demolishing the dead, wrapping myself in the sun's ribbons. I am learning to be young, delirious among the ruins at 3 in the afternoon. Why do you keep fighting, poet, sharing pain and joy in difficult times? Is it the ashes collecting on your teeth? Why are so few born at 3 in the afternoon? Why do I die? Are words bitter seed or fierce anemone? Weapons or prayers? Poet, what is your favorite color of kite? Why are words never what they seem? Falling eyes, rising mouths, charging bulls or smoke. Will you remain on the earth or flee like a lost river, an archaeologist chasing the stars? In about 2006, excuse me, I got into the environmental industry and started working for private sector environmental consultants as a technical editor. And I worked with a lot of climate change scientists, among many others. And I really, really enjoyed it as a poet. I enjoyed their skepticism of themselves and the integrity with which they worked. And in editing their reports and talking with them, learned a great deal. This poem, I won't say much more about it. Love in a Changing Climate. Touching your absent hand, I am like the saint who wanders with the first yellow leaf, the ease of what might be mistaken for our familiar love. It's never easy to sustain in the eyes what changes inside, to feel the fear, the abandonment, and shame. Listen, the wind is scattering our names. We are the question the stone in the river ask. Had I been with you when you died, I'd know him who knows how to shepherd the dying home. Illiterate birds ravel our lives with 12 strings, and we find love that takes the leap with us, stays to clean up the birth of the cosmos, the benevolent trees that burn like us. One Thanksgiving, excuse me, I guess I'm catching Lois's cold from 400 miles away. I was meeting all morning and talking all morning, and I'm paying for it now. And so are you. One Thanksgiving, my family and I were driving to Half Moon Bay to spend it with my brother and his family, and we were cresting the Coast Range, and our little daughter in her car seat in the back started asking these questions. And I'm trying to control the car on the winding road, right? And I'm getting these questions that are very difficult to answer, put it that way. Mysterious figure. She also started learning sax a little later than that, and was real into math. Is God a girl? You ask as we climb the Coast Range, your taste for iron and salt expanding beyond your 1,875th day. Do numbers go forever? Our small car rounds a curve and catches sight of the shimmering sea. If numbers keep going, there must be a day, Itty. You say it this way, your cheeks the color of apricots, beautiful mind hungry as one bee. No cloud, no chord, no stone, no poem will ever be like yours. Today you blow on your alto saxophone lonely numerals with love, numbers that have no other. I blow a kiss to the mystery of who you are as your fingers discover twilight. Life moves with sweet intensity when you blossom geometrically. Your lips touch infinity, this small world. You play the wind, listen for the rain, and take flight with the ferocity of one drawn to song, sculpting your own Greek isle. With each breath, you seek a heaven that has no need of honey. The sixth book of Pablo Neruda's that I translated is called The Book of Questions. So it's payback time for Pablo. He got to ask a whole book of them. Questions for Pablo. Where did you leave it, the poem not written? The beginning, is it a death or a birth? Does the rose kiss you with its mouth full of blood? Was it a smile or a wound that devoured you? Unlikely sea, conflicted star, Do you still fear what you love? Is it you who makes the gourds rattle in my summer garden? You who hammers the distance into shapes? At the core of this book called The New Gods, there are two poems I would describe as maybe mythopoetic. I make up my own deities, so to speak. Both of these, well, I'm only going to read one of them, but both of these poems were put on video or recreated in video by the world-class visual artist Galen Garwood and set to music by Jamie Sieber. In case of this poem, Origin, I'll read. The other tonight was accompanied by Louis Valentine Johnson, innovative classical guitarist, close friend of mine, who I'll soon be performing with in March. Origin, again, a ekphrastic poem. It was written or inspired by Anne Raglan Bound's painting, The Mountains Melting, and performed again, first at the Sacramento Fine Arts Center, accompanied by the Ryan Clark Quartet. Origin. Long ago, you and I struggled to be born among the standing stones. Underground fire, mineral rain, furrows of imagination yellowed by the sun. Our immobile blood burned blue, even as the wind shaped our serene incarnation. We deciphered the doors of the earth, found the one to open on who we would become. Our still closed eyes strive to name oneness, to behold the mystery of our bodies, falling in a rage of flame, in the rhythms and textures of our appetites. We tuned ourselves to sow and reap, shepherd and slaughter, to be true to many selves and the singularity from which we came. Forging weapons that turn night to day, we meditated on the clouds, littered with the psalms of migrating birds. We mourned the wild horses, the range stripped of native forage. The prayer wheel spun us at our core as we labored to learn that how we live is what we leave behind. Returning to the solace of not seeking, we need no face or syllable or seed as we come to know in our hearts what we cannot know any other way. And just a couple more. Speaking of Pablo Neruda, all those years, decades really, that I translated his work, I never imitated his poems, never wrote a poem for him. Imitating his poems, I knew would be death. There's no way to do that. People have been shattered on rocks trying to do that, and especially among a lot of young Latin American poets. But I went to Chile in 2008, well after the dictatorship had ended, and when I finally got time to go, and spent 3 weeks in Chile, up and down the country, going to all the Neruda hotspots, and then 8 days and 8 nights on Easter Island, which Chile owns. It was the most amazing month of my life. And then I started writing like crazy, for Neruda, to Neruda. And this poem is inspired primarily from his home in Isla Negra, a very small village on the coast, about 60 kilometers southwest of Santiago. It was his favorite home. It's a museum now, and he was quite the collector. And he and Matilde, his third wife, are buried in the backyard. He was moved to the house from the General Cemetery in Santiago well after the coup ended, or I should say the dictatorship ended. The dreamer, oh, and finally, let me say that when I was living in Seattle many years ago, I had the most vivid dream of my life where this young boy came out of this closet and I recognized him, and his hair was slicked back, and he handed me a glass of crystalline water. Beautiful. It was a beautiful image. I'll let you guess who that might have been. The Dreamers. One night, a boy emerges from among the clothes hanging in the open closet and stands beside the bed. He is dressed in dark woolen trousers and a white shirt, buttoned at the neck, and his shiny black hair is slicked back as they wore it in his day. He slowly reaches out to me. In his hand, a glass of water, iridescent. The colors are my voice, an offering drawn from the mineral spring of the first beginning. Now I stand at his grave where the world ends and the cormorants cry, and I can hear the horse's tail swishing among the trees. Like secret phosphorus, a gift of woolen socks binds the weaving hands to oceanic light. The plutonic rocks born of the far south rise from the shelves into our consciousness, bearing the volcanic words he left to us. His wild-haired love still sings as she dusks the weeping figurehead, the small black god, the brass telescope, a gift from the French, and watches for his return from mountain or sea, where side by side they live on, like water or inevitability. And speaking with other folks who have done a significant amount of translating, done it in an abiding way, doing enough of it, you go well beyond imitation, and you realize that poet, who's usually a fairly great poet because you've committed a lot of time, you wouldn't otherwise, has given you your voice. Those poets often thank us for giving our voice to them. I found quite the opposite was true. Neruda helped give me my voice. And I'll close with this poem, again, ekaphrastic. This was after Gary Edward Foster's painting, Got to Dance. And again, it was first performed with the Dave Brubeck Jazz Quintet at the Sacramento Fine Arts Center. Heron dances over the world. Even you're not watching as you spread your black tattered wings and step among the colors of the physical world. Spindly legs conjure the symbol for infinity in red earth, in fresh blue snow and white mist. Endangered islands bloom. The wetland fills with mountain shadow. In a parallel universe, your reflection moves to its inner calling, to folded granite, music of the waterfall. You live as hidden origami with creases and abandon, intricate patterns that resist the receding shore. You circle, an equation neither eyes nor lips can touch, motion that can't be solved or written on the tongue. You do not stop to preen among the battered dunes. Your cry rings iron from irony, recalls the silent bells, laments the love I've forgotten. You breathe closer to the swaying aspen than to the orphan moon and the tide's pull. In this dance, you create, like a beetle, your own being. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. I love your poetry, the respect that you have, the sagaciousness, your humility, your use of real physical details. That lovely poem, I think it was called Mysterious Figure, when you were driving and your daughter was asking you the questions. Your love of family, your love of Neruda. I mean, it's really pretty astonishing. So very deep. And I appreciate your use of real physical details, you know, that you're looking at the landscape when you're up in the Sierras. When a poet writes, uses real physical details, then the reader can share those emotions that you're going through the physical details. And particularizations are always great. Remember, Blake said particularizations are geniuses and generalizations are idiots. So it's always important to be particular. You really blessed us with your reading. We have a few more minutes here. I'd like to ask you the same two questions I asked Lois, and then maybe we can, both of you and myself can talk a little bit about poetry. It's all about poetry. When did you write your first poem?
Harry, that would have been when I was 16, 16, and I just dabbled in it, and then I got serious when I was 19 and was remarkably fortunate to publish my first poem at age 19.
And what is
it? I'm 24. It's I've come a long way.
You started out. You knew what you wanted. You started out right. What is it that attracts you to the poetry form?
What I first discovered, I think, Harry, that I was a poet or an aspiring poet, just by I felt there was like a compass in my heart. I would hear poetry, people read it, and I would just be completely absorbed. When I'd go to write it, 4 hours would pass, and I'd look at the clock and think, wait a minute, that was about a half hour. And so that real physicality of poetry drew me in big time. But also, I love the way it draws, the way it expresses what words themselves cannot. So, though it's made of words, the music, the cadence, the resonance is as meaningful often as the words themselves. And so in my view, words don't make the poem. The poem is a much richer, fuller experience than the words themselves, and they perhaps are the vehicles. And so it encompassed music. I got this strong sense of dance when I was writing, the way my mind would work, the way the heart would work. It was really a dance. And so that absorption. And I also love the sense or the way in which poetry creates community. So, Zoom readings have been really great. People joining from France, Germany, Los Angeles, Ireland, that's great. But also to be in a room and just to share the reading and listening of poetry is a very strong motivator for community, I've found. And those communities last. So I feel I have friends everywhere that's happened.
I like what you said. Lois, why don't you come on too? All three of us will talk. I would like to ask each of you the question and start with Lois and then William. What should we, you both know a lot about poetry and you've written a lot. What should we be talking about when we talk about poetry in our time? Lois? And the reason, what I mean by that is I was born in 1940, so I've seen, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, Chicano movement, the multi-gender, multi-ethnic, etc. So a lot of things have changed. When I grew up, I didn't know that many women poets, and now there's bountiful amount, and thank God for that. But what should we be talking about when we talk about today, Lois, in terms of poetry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, there aren't really shoulds in poetry, because poetry has to come from some deep place that you're responding to. So whatever a person is impassioned by, we are to be aware of what's going on in the world, and social injustice and wars that we hate and tragedy and everything that's happened to us in the last few years. If there's a moment when a particular incident affects you in some way, that's when I'm compelled to write about it. But I'm not constantly, drawing those things into my mind, because I also feel that the shoulds of poetry are connected with our need for beauty in the world, our need to connect with one another as human beings in a tender way, our love of the environment and nature and what that does for us. So all the old reasons and all the new reasons, if that answers it.
Well said. How about you? What do you think, William, we should be talking about when we talk about poetry in our time?
Well, Harry, I think what occurs to me, and this relates very strongly to Neruda, because that's what he did, is how poetry gives voice to the voiceless, how it represents, and certainly not just the poet. But I think that it's very difficult at times to break through, especially these times, because I've been doing this for a while now. The standard path to become a poet, you get your master's of fine arts, which I have one. I'm not knocking it, but you get, and then you go teach, and largely this is the path, and there's this striving for career, and there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But I think this is a time we're such a divided country. The world wants to simply be on fire, it seems. And so I think focusing on what it is that we can say to each other that is both an expression of tolerance and an understanding of different points of view, but a commonality, an extreme commonality. There's so much overt racism now that's being expressed. It was always there, but it's being expressed. And yet the color of the skin goes down about that far, and the rest of us are human, we're all human. And so using that as a metaphor, I feel the same way about poetry. I want to talk not so much about what we've achieved, but how we combine more closely together to see the commonality that makes us human. And poetry with its, excuse me again, its articulation, its logos, its words, its music, and the fact that every culture participates in a big way. And then our history came from poetry. The oral tradition was rooted there. It's the oldest art form right next to cave paintings. So I think it expresses, I'll be biased, almost more than any other art form, who we are. And that's what I want to talk about, who we are.
And also the vulnerability, you know, isn't there a line in one of Neruda's poems about it? I love you the way I do because it's the only way I know how to love you. Something like that, depending on, I guess, on, I don't know the language. And then the other thing, what you just brought up, you know, I went to see W.S. Merwin at the LA Central Library years ago, and he started out his reading by saying, and many linguists believe that the first utterance of language was in poetry and it came out of grief. Now, okay, we have to take that. We don't know for certain. The jury's still out, right? But it's a pretty good guess. You know, why not joy? But maybe grief. Maybe a woman giving birth. You know, the pain and the happiness. But you know, you two are both so learned about poetry, and it just it's touching. How do you, you know, with me? I mean, you were talking earlier, William, about, you know, you sit down and write a poem and 4 hours pass. You thought it was like a half hour. To me, when I go to poetry, like as I'm doing the show now, for instance, or reading or writing poetry, it's the one place where I find sanity in the world and harmony. You know, like we're all listening to each other and we're thinking about things that are important to us. And then how do you, it seems difficult sometimes for the poet, you know, to deal in real life. I mean, obviously we all have to make a living, but how do you deal with that aspect in terms of being a poet in this world? I mean, you know, they always say, you've heard that question many times, where is there a place for poetry in America? And I always say, here's a place for poetry right here and now. But how do you deal with real life in that? Or is that just a nonsense question, the difficulty of that?
Well, I don't think it's a nonsense question at all, Harry. I think it goes right to the core of how we live as poets, artists. Actually, I've done a lot of teaching, most of it higher education, college, MFA program, that sort of thing. I've worked in software and as an instructional designer, senior instructional designer. And I had my own consulting firm where I worked for television, for television writers, dentists. I mean, you know, in terms of communication, as an editor and a writer. And then since 2006, I was mentioning, I've worked in the environmental industry, and I now work at California Department of Water Resources on the California Water Plan. And it all feeds my poetry. And
what?
It all feeds my poetry. In software, I was amazed. Everything aside, you know, there's the bits and the bytes, and everything else is metaphor. Which is what I thoroughly enjoyed in terms of doing tutorials and teaching people to use operating systems, Windows in particular, and in many languages. And so I really enjoyed that sense of metaphor, and there's a lot to say about that. The environmental industry, I got into it because my poetry is so rooted in the environment, earthbound. And teaching, you know, I taught a lot of poetry, American literature and all of that. And, you know, being with students, that dialogue fueled me greatly. And just the imparting of knowledge and what you learn as a teacher. So in all of those industries, I've been very fortunate to have, to be not only a giver, but a great receiver. And that's, to me, is the heart of poetry.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Lois, what do you think about the poet's place in society? And, you know, you heard what I said earlier.
I think that if you're a good poet, you are a good listener. and you're a good observer and a witness to what is happening in the world. And so poets are essential to observe and to bring their art, not only their art to the world, but their ability to understand what's happening outside of them. And so I just find my encounters, I mean, yeah, you certainly have experiences with people who don't want to know anything about poetry, but that's less common in my experience. I think people are more open to it. They automatically know that there is something that they want to put their attention to, that, or they'll give you an example of some aspect of poetry in their life. And personally, I think everyone has some poetic ability within them. Even the sports announcer who's talking about the high fly ball that's going out into the field. Everybody has a way to articulate an aesthetic, and poetry is just, I think it's not necessarily something that's particular to an individual. We can pursue it as an art, but I think it exists in everyone.
That's well said. And, you know, to your point about metaphor earlier, William, didn't Aristotle say poetry rests on metaphor? And both of you are so good with metaphor and also similes. This has really been an enlightening half hour plus to me. You both have so much knowledge and so much heart, and I appreciate your poetry deeply. So I want to thank you, Lois, and I want to thank you for recommending William. You two both are just marvelous poets. So I think that's about it. And as we all know, television waits for no man or woman, so show must go on. And here's our director. So thank you, Jennifer Clymer, and thank you, William O'Daly and Lois P. Jones.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And we can't let Harry go until he tells us what's happening next week.
Next Tuesday, February 28th, the wonderful actors Corinne Conley, Kay Wiseman, Helen Richmond, and Tony Sawyer will read from H.D. collected poems 1912 to 1944. And 4 of the poems they're reading, one is the priest, one the dancer, one the poet, and there's one other one. One's about D.H. Lawrence, one's about Freud, one's about a man that H.D. had a fixation on for 15 years, and one's about the feminine independence and strength, the dancer, and then some of her Sea Garden poems. But she's just a marvelous poet. So that's it, and thank you once again, all of you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you who tuned in. Come back next week.